All right, welcome to the beautiful Pacific Northwest and PacWest Bigfoot. This is David. Let me fix my microphone right there. And welcome. We're going to go ahead and get into this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. I'll have another one for you here shortly over the next couple weeks. So for now, enjoy and have a great weekend. Homeowners discover Bigfoot around their property in Maple Falls, Washington. Autumn is a beautiful time of the year in Maple Falls, pretty picturesque, but it is also a pretty scary time when Bigfoot comes around, that's for dang sure. It's amazing how you think you know about the world around you and how much you don't. Honestly, the latter is far greater than the former. Here's what happened to the wife and me in 2002 just outside of Maple Falls, Washington. Autumn in New York. 2002, and we were still on the edge about all that had happened the year before. 9/11 took a friend of ours, and between that and everything else going on, we decided to leave New York City. We were about to dive into another autumn in New York, but after the last one, well, this one would not be anything like the previous 8 of them we experienced up to that point. So, with a change of mind about leaving the city, we decided it was time to try the countryside instead. So, why Maple Falls, Washington, and why so far away? Well, my wife was originally from Oregon, Portland to be exact. She and her family had a cabin up in the state of Washington just outside of Maple Falls. They would visit almost every summer, and sometimes for Christmas. Seeing how we both worked from home as web designers and developers, well, we could literally work from anywhere with a decent enough internet service. Even by 2002, the service up around the area was stable and strong enough for us. So leaving the friends behind in our life in the city, after years and years, we moved to the country. We would literally see our first autumn in Maple Falls. Well, my first at least, but our first together for sure. The neighbors are crazy. It was the last week of August when we finally closed on our house. It was the first time I'd seen so many pine trees and mountains in my life, being a city boy all my life, if you will. Spruce, pine, you name it, and the deciduous trees were just everywhere. The house was perfect, about 2 miles out of town, just enough back then to get the local cable and internet up and not the satellite stuff that back then was just horrible. Anyway, it was perfect, even better than I expected. Even except for one thing, Bigfoot. It started with me hearing things that literally went bump in the night. Of course, my wife had been used to the quietness and the not so quietness of the fauna that wandered about the property during the day and night. Being from the city, the quietness can be deafening, just as every little noise can be worrisome. The first few nights, my wife took me out onto our back deck that looked down the backside of our property that sloped down to a creek. I could hear the water faintly, but it was the other sound she'd tell me about. One night was the sound of 2 owls communicating. The next were deer moving along the brush and trees. About a week in, and we heard something we could not even explain ourselves. But she tried and said it was wolves or coyote. I was not without knowing anything about all of this, but being a city boy, well, it took some time to getting used to. About late September, in that first week of October, things started ramping up a bit with the coyote or wolves. I decided one night to step out on the back deck while she was asleep and listen to the sounds myself. I was awake. It was a bit nippy at night by then, but not too bad. The coyotes were closer to the property, it sounded too. Within half a mile at least. That is how close I judged those howls to be. But for some reason in the back of my head, they simply did not sound like a dog's howl. There was something different about them, especially when they tailed off. It was like, well, a person trying to sound like a dog, but failing miserably in the end. But that was not possible. Someone being that loud had to be huge and just massive to have that kind of set of lungs. Maybe it was some neighbors partying that night away, howling at the full moon. That was another thought that passed briefly through my mind. But even the strange sounds emanating from the woods beyond, I headed in and slept like a baby. Speaking of baby, Well, October was in full fall mode. The trees, all but the pine trees, of course, they were all in full gold, red, brown, and or a beautiful purplish color. It was beautiful. So was my wife. She was glowing. We were pregnant. Okay, she was pregnant. It was the perfect fall, I have to say. It was more beautiful than a fall in New York, if you ask me. And that is pretty nice. That's a pretty nice sight, even if you are from the country. But the strange howling continued and seemed to move closer and closer towards the property each and every night. It was about the middle of October when my wife would start to question her own idea of what she thought this howling was coming from. She listened intently, even once or twice with tea in hand and her eyes closed as if to study the sound. She sifted through her memories growing up of the sounds, and bang! She found it. She remembered it. Bigfoot, she said it, and with a bit of excitement in her voice. Talk about making me laugh. Even this sleek, tech-smart, latte-sipping boy from Manhattan had heard of the legendary monster of the woods. From time to time, up near Whitehall, we'd hear of the sightings. But mythical beasts really living in the woods? Nah, not possible, I thought. But by now, they'd have caught one or shot one as far as I was concerned. So I shrugged it off lightheartedly, of course. And the rest of the evening we talked about the baby's room. 2 days later, and I was home alone. I decided to get some work done outside, just off the deck near the fire pit we had built. It was a partly cloudy day, but no rain was called for. So I started a fire in the pit, grabbed some coffee, and worked and sipped al fresco on the computer. It was the sound of brush and dead branches being stepped upon that had me bringing my head up and looking directly toward the creek. The rushing water was louder by that point in the fall, but not loud enough to hide whatever animal was passing through. Whatever it was big. I was thinking deer or buck perhaps, or even an elk, but not a giant shadow of a person. That was the last thing my short list in my mind was of something I'd see way out here. But no sooner did I look back down at the website I was creating when I heard the snap of a much larger branch. I looked up, but at first it was hard to see much of anything with the shadows being cast all around by a partly cloudy day. But I did. Whatever it was big, dark, and all I could make out that day was the shoulders and upper torso, I suppose. But there was something swaying in and out from some trees, a tall scrub oak just inside the shadows of that tree line. Talk about being freaked out. Listen, I have been in the middle of 2 stores during 2 robberies in my life. I've watched 2 towers fall and seen the brutality that a city in America can be capable of. But this was simply out of left field. My mind was having a really hard time processing this thing just staring in my direction, or at least I thought so. I could not make out a face. But suddenly, before I could stand and run for the safety of the house, it just turned and it literally just walked off. It walked. And let me say again, Dave, it walked off towards the creek. November. My wife and my in-laws were rather helpful in helping me to realize that I saw was, in fact, a Bigfoot. She had never seen one, but her mom and dad swore one crossed in front of them once when driving up this way for Christmas, when my wife was around 5 years old. They described it as tall, massive, and broad-shouldered, and as well as hairy and faster than lightning. Of course, with that last bit of description, I asked if they were sure it was a Bigfoot, not a bear or something. They still swore up and down that what they saw, they saw what they saw. Her dad said it actually stopped for a second on the opposite side of the road, stood on 2 legs, then leaped down the ravine. This, they said, happened between Welcome and Kendall, Washington, along Highway 542, or Mount Baker Highway. We took a hike to the falls that mid-autumn. It was beautiful. We also killed 2 birds with 1 stone again by taking pictures for our web design and development business. For about a week, things were quiet back at the house, too quiet if you ask me, actually. Here and there, I would wake out of a dead sleep and step out on the back door and onto the deck and hear nothing but the creek running. Seriously. No crickets, no movement, no nothing. It was truly eerie. It was not until that first Friday of the month when there was a slap on the back side of the house that woke us both up. Well, to be honest, I was already awake, but without warning, there came a loud thud against the house that had to be something hitting it hard. It literally seemed to rattle the whole wall behind us. We popped up real quick and ran to the window, but it was far too dark outside to see a thing. That is when I made the mental note to get motion lights, which I did and installed over that very weekend. We were both a bit uneasy whatever it was, it slapped it. It had to be something strong and pretty powerful to hit the side of that house and even left a crack in the siding. It takes a pretty hard hit to accomplish that feat. I have to admit I was freaking out a lot. While my wife was suddenly finding the events somewhat thrilling and whatnot, I found myself wanting to sell the place and move to nearby Everson, or at least closer into the town of Maple Falls. But my wife knew everything would be okay. She just had a feeling, she said, and so we stayed. Baby bump. She sure looked beautiful. That baby bump had become noticeable. Okay, it was barely noticeable, but I could see the difference. So, where are the bumps that go in the night on the property as well? It seemed to me that since the slap on the wall, things had ramped up a bit with the Bigfoot neighbors. One night, not a week after the slap, we were sitting there when what came flying across the deck but a small pebble. Then seconds later, another. We decided that with that to head inside for the rest of the evening. My wife, in full research mode by then, had decided to sit by the back sliding glass door with it open and screened shut to see if she could see anything, any Bigfoot that would set off the motion lights. She was rewarded with a large stick that hit the steps on the deck not 10 minutes later. She was so energized. I was so freaked out. I started reading up a bit about them and even had one conversation with a newfound friend at church who said, and let me be exact here for a moment, Dave, but he said, don't trust these things. They can be unpredictable. There are many, many legends about them around these parts, and none of them are good. That was it for me. I was going to do what I could to at least shoo them away. My wife, being herself and nothing to do with being over emotional because of the pregnancy, would not move. But she did give me space to at least try and get these things to move on from our property. So I took up shooting. Against my better judgment, and of course, she would not let me shoot in the backyard. I had to do my target practice down along the creek. Even the walk along the small path made me uneasy. All the foliage and low branches hid everything, and it made it dark and menacing the whole way to the edge of the creek. I found a small sandbar down there where I had room to shoot across the creek and into the side of a hill or a small mountain as it was. Nobody lived over there, and there were no trails of any kind, so it was safe to shoot there. It was creepy there, however. Normally I think I would have been fine back there, and was before all this started, but now it was just all so creepy. By the first week's end, and right before Thanksgiving, however, I became a pretty crack shot, to be honest. I'm glad I was, too, because that would be the second and last time I'd see Bigfoot. The creek devil. The wife was getting those weird cravings already, and it was not for pickles. It was for jerky. Pepper jerky. So 2 days before Thanksgiving, I was at the store in town grabbing more canned cranberry sauce. I think I was also grabbing some more celery and of course, the jerky. I was backing out of the parking lot at the store when my cell phone started vibrating. It was my wife. I thought something was wrong with her, but she was physically fine, but scared. She was freaked out. Frantically, she explained to me that there was literally 2 large creatures running around the property at that moment, throwing stuff at the house. One window was cracked from a small rock already. I turned on the speakerphone and gunned the car. She talked to me the whole time. It'd be 10 minutes to get there. 10 long, grueling, irritating minutes for sure. She said they were running around and around, mumbling, talking in some kind of gibberish that was finally making her scared. She even let out the fact she got the gun ready for me when I showed up. I pulled into the driveway, jumped out of the still idling car and straight into the house. I grabbed the gun and headed out slowly onto the deck. I heard them immediately, but they were now heading down towards the creek. The crashing through the brush and trees was loud, like a freight train moving through them. I was pretty mad, and without hesitation, and like a dummy, I pursued them into the forest. I reached the sandbar and saw what looked like at least one large footprint. It had to be at least 16, 17 inches long. Even with the drizzling rain slowly dissolving it away, that scared me, and I finally realized the situation I was in. In the woods of the Pacific Northwest, literally chasing monsters on foot. Not a good plan, I finally thought to myself. But it was too late. At that moment, I saw it, standing there, about 30 to 40 feet away from me. It literally stood up from behind a bunch of brush, and it towered over them, as you and I would tomato plants in a garden. Its thighs, the upper thighs, were visible as well as the rest of it. It was dark brown in color, had a chest that was at least 3 to 4 feet wide, a large head sitting between just these two massive shoulders with almost no neck at all. The face was exactly like that of an ape, but the eyes much bigger, rounder, seemed to have a color to them. But I can't remember what color to this day, and it just looked scary. I was so scared of the massiveness of these things, and its face was just scary. It was just like facing the worst nightmare scenario head on, and you had nowhere to run. I know I didn't. It started grunting and slinging its arms about like it was really, really mad. Looking back, I thought at that moment that it was going to attack me. I raised my rifle. Its eyes went wide, and I let off a shot, shooting just over its head by a foot or two on purpose. I didn't want to kill it, but I would have if it charged me. It screamed and ran off into the woods, breaking and smashing everything in its way. I fell to my knees, prayed, and just sat there for what seemed an hour. Little monster. Carolyn was born the following year, 7 pounds, 8.5 ounces. And since that day at the creek, she is the only little monster in our lives, and a good one. I can't tell you, Dave, how badly I wanted to move. It brought out a couple short but pretty sharp arguments between us at the time. But I was allowed to put up a fence and round the top an electric wire to accompany it, just in case. I know, probably would not stop something like that, but might make them second guess themselves if they ever come back. But as I said, since that day, things have been real quiet around here, period. And I'm very glad of that. That is our encounter story. Thanks, Greg and Julie.